Light doesn't care about you. Right now, somewhere above the moon, 4 humans will aim a camera at the Andromeda Galaxy. They'll capture photons that began traveling 2,537,000 years ago. When that light left, our species didn't exist. The dominant hominid was Homo habilis, tool users, not yet us. We wouldn't emerge for another 2.2 million years. The crew thinks they're still. They're not. They're screaming through space at 550 kilometers per second, dragged by forces they can't feel. Their entire mission, 10.3 days, represents 0.00000000228% of the moon's existence. Every photograph they take is a lie. The sun as it was 8 minutes ago, Earth as it was 1.3 seconds ago, stars as they were centuries dead. This is a photograph of a ghost. 52 years, more than half a century has passed since a human being last pressed boot to lunar regolith. Since we last pretended for a brief and desperate moment that we belong somewhere other than this pale blue quarantine. Apollo 17 was not an ending. It was an abandonment. The mission didn't conclude because we had learned all there was to know. It ended because the cameras stopped delivering political dividends, because the Cold War scoreboard no longer needed updating, because the moon, once a glowing symbol of ideological supremacy, revealed itself to be what it always was, a dead sphere of dust, indifferent to flags. And now, after decades of silence, Artemis II arrives, draped in the language of heroism. A return, a sequel. But sequels are made when the original story still sells tickets. The rhetoric is familiar: conquest, mastery, the frontier, words borrowed from terrestrial imperialism, now projected onto a vacuum that cannot be conquered because it does not resist. Humanity speaks of mastering space, as if orbital mechanics were a beast to be tamed, rather than a mathematical indifference we are allowed to briefly navigate before falling back to Earth. We do not conquer gravity, we negotiate with it. Poorly. Consider what the moon has been to us, how we have dressed it in our own meanings like a mannequin in a closed shop window. To the ancients, a god, a clock, a lamp hung in the sky by divine architecture. To Cold War strategists, high ground, a hill to plant a flag on, visible from Moscow. To geologists, an archive of impact craters, a fossilized record of cosmic violence. To modern mission planners, a way station, a refueling depot, a rock with frozen water we might exploit. We have never seen the moon as it is. We see only what we need it to be. And now we need it to be inspiring, a symbol of renewal. Proof that we have not given up. Proof that the 52-year gap was merely a pause, not a retreat. The mission is sold with the promise of the overview effect, that guaranteed epiphany astronauts supposedly experience when they see Earth from orbit. A cognitive shift, a moment of profound perspective. But what if that shift is simply the brain's last defense against confronting its own irrelevance? A psychological coping mechanism wrapped in poetic language? You see the Earth, small, fragile, borderless, and you feel awe. But awe is not understanding. Awe is the feeling of being unable to process scale. It is the emotion of surrender. The overview effect does not reveal truth. It reveals how poorly equipped we are to hold truth in our minds without collapsing into metaphor. And what do we truly know of the moon after all these decades? Not much. Our knowledge comes almost entirely from machines. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, SOHO, passive instruments that circle and observe, sending back data we interpret from the safety of our atmospheric shell. We do not touch the cosmos. We photograph it. We do not explore space. We survey it from a distance, like anxious cartographers charting a map we will never walk. Artemis II will carry 4 humans in a capsule around the moon. They will not land. They will not walk its surface. They will orbit, briefly, and return. A controlled fall, dressed as destiny. 52 years, long enough for an entire generation to grow old without ever witnessing human beings leave low Earth orbit. Long enough for space travel to become mythology. Long enough for us to forget that Apollo was never about exploration, it was about theater. And now the curtain rises again, not because we have solved the problems that grounded us, but because the script demands a second act. The moon does not care, it never did. It will orbit, silent, cratered, patient, long after every flag we plant has been bleached white by unfiltered solar radiation. Long after every footprint has been erased by micrometeorite bombardment. Long after the last broadcast signal fades into the cosmic microwave background. The moon will remain, and we will call it progress. The spacecraft weighs 26,000 kilograms. The moon weighs 7.342 times 10 to the 22nd kilograms. The ratio between observer and observed, 3.6 times 10 to the negative 19th. In the language of celestial mechanics, the crew is a rounding error, a computational artifact, a phantom mass that exists only because our instruments lack the precision to delete it entirely. They orbit the Earth-Moon barycenter, the true gravitational anchor of their trajectory, a coordinate located 1,707 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. Not a mountain, not a core of iron, not even matter, empty space. They are orbiting a mathematical abstraction, a point that exists only in the equations we use to predict where things fall. This is what navigation means at this scale. Threading yourself through the gravitational influence of concepts. The volume of cislunar space measures 2.38 times 10 to the 17th cubic kilometers. The capsule's interior, 33 cubic meters. The ratio of occupied volume to void, 1.38 times 10 to the negative 25th. Imagine a single bacterium suspended in the Atlantic Ocean. Then expand that ocean to fill the space between continents that don't exist. The crew is smaller than that. Statistically, they are navigating non-existence, piloting through a vacuum so comprehensive that calling it empty feels generous. Most of the universe is nothing. This mission is practice. Re-entry velocity, Mach 32. 11 kilometers per second of kinetic energy that must be bled away through controlled atmospheric compression. A process that turns the capsule's heat shield into a temporary sun. This is not engineering. This is negotiation. The velocity is the price. The heat shield is the currency. And the atmosphere, our atmospheric anomaly, that thin skin of nitrogen and fraud we call survivable, determines whether the transaction clears. You leave the cradle at Mach 32. You return at Mach 32. The toll is symmetrical. At maximum distance, the crew will be 370,000 kilometers from Earth. In light years, 0.000000039. The nearest star is 4.2 light years away, over 100 million times farther. If this mission represents the farthest edge of human exploration, then the cosmos has not noticed. The needle has not moved. The gap between historic achievement and local disturbance remains administratively unchanged. We are still inside the room where we were born. The 10-day mission is a computed solution to the three-body problem. The gravitational choreography of Earth, Moon, and spacecraft. A system that is fundamentally chaotic, analytically unsolvable, sensitive to initial conditions down to the quantum foam. Over long timescales, prediction collapses. The equations don't lie, they decay. The orbit is a best guess carved into a system that refuses to be known. Every trajectory update is an admission. Every course correction, a confession that the math only works if you don't look too far ahead. The mission succeeds not because we solved the problem, but because we agreed to stop asking it questions. The rocket equation is not a suggestion. It is a law written in the grammar of reality itself, and it despises ambition. To accelerate a payload, you need fuel. To carry that fuel, you need more fuel. To carry that fuel, you need exponentially more fuel. The curve is vicious, merciless. By the time you attempt to leave the solar system with chemical propulsion, the mathematics demand a fuel tank larger than the volume of the known universe. The equation doesn't care about your dreams. It tethers you to this star more securely than any chain ever could, because the chain is woven from exponents, and exponents do not forgive. But suppose you accept the leash. Suppose you stay within the sun's gravity well, coasting through the inner system on the smallest sip of propellant. You are still not safe. Space is not empty. Galactic cosmic rays pass through the hull like it isn't there, because to a particle traveling at near light speed, your ship's aluminum skin is not a shield. It is tissue paper. It is a delay measured in nanoseconds before the particle continues its trajectory, straight through the metal, through the cabin air, through the flesh of the crew. These are not bursts of radiation. They are a continuous hail. Subatomic bullets fired by dying stars, by supernovae that collapsed before our sun was born. They do not burn. They do not announce themselves. They simply shred. DNA strands unzip. Cellular machinery misfires. The damage accumulates silently, like rust forming in the dark. The crew ages faster than they should. Their eyes cloud with cataracts. Tumors bloom in tissue that was healthy at launch. The void does not attack, it simply erodes. And if the hull fails, if a micrometeorite punctures the pressure vessel, if a seal degrades, if the membrane between inside and outside dissolves for even a moment, the crew will learn what the vacuum truly is. It is not empty space. It is the default state. Life is the anomaly. The human body is a pressurized vessel of liquid, 14.7 pounds per square inch, holding everything inside: blood, water, soft tissue, against a universe that exerts zero pressure in return. Unprotected exposure does not freeze you instantly. It does something worse. The water in your blood, in your lungs, in the moisture on your tongue, it boils. Not from heat, from the absence of pressure. The process is called ebullition. Your tissues swell, your veins distend. You remain conscious for 10, maybe 15 seconds, long enough to understand what is happening to you. Life cannot survive the norm. And the norm is everything beyond that fragile shell of gas we call atmosphere. From cislunar space, the Earth is not a marble. It is a single biological cell, blue, wet, impossibly alone. The atmosphere that sustains 7 billion lives is thinner than the skin of an apple. All of history lives inside that membrane. Every war, every poem, every breath ever taken, contained within a layer of gas so thin it would vanish if the planet stopped spinning. The beauty of it, the overwhelming, aching beauty, is not inspirational. It is the immediate perception of fragility. One cell, one membrane, one failure away from becoming Mars. And you, the astronaut staring back at it, you are outside. You are no longer protected by the anomaly. You are in the place where things are not supposed to live. You are a passenger now, not a pilot. The trajectory you follow is not a flight path. It is a leash made of gravity. The free return arc around the moon was calculated on Earth weeks ago by minds far from this cold cockpit. You do not steer, you do not choose. You fall in a shape that has been carefully aimed to miss one body and return to another. You have no more control over your ultimate destination than a stone thrown into the air. The stone does not decide where it lands. Neither do you. You are bound by equations older than bone, tethered by laws that were true before the first cell divided and will remain true long after the last star goes dark. The prison has no bars. It is built from exponents, from particle physics, from the suffocating arithmetic of delta V and radiation dose. And there is no parole. The universe should be screaming. The mathematics are brutal in their clarity. Hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. The sheer probability of intelligent life emerging should render the cosmos a symphony of transmissions, a cacophony of civilizations reaching across the void. We hear nothing, not a whisper, not a stray radio signal bleeding through the static, not a single engineered structure orbiting a distant sun. The observable universe stretches 14 billion parsecs in every direction, and the only voice we detect is our own echo. This is the Fermi paradox, the mathematical certainty of alien intelligence colliding with the observed reality of total silence. And that silence demands an explanation. We call it the Great Filter. Somewhere between the first self-replicating molecule and the construction of a galaxy-spanning civilization, there exists a barrier, a threshold that intelligence cannot cross, a moment where the cosmic experiment fails. The question that follows is not philosophical. It is existential. Where is the filter? Behind us or ahead? Hypothesis 1. We are the statistical anomaly. The emergence of life itself may be so vanishingly rare that Earth represents a singular event in the visible universe. Every step of our existence, a lottery win compounding upon lottery win. The assembly of proteins from primordial chemistry, the endosymbiotic merger that created complex cells, the Cambrian explosion, the meteor that cleared the ecological niche for mammals, the exact atmospheric composition, the stabilizing presence of our moon, each transition a filter in itself. If this is true, then the silence is not a warning. It is the baseline state of reality. An empty cosmos where consciousness flickered into being exactly once on a small planet orbiting an unremarkable star. The void is not waiting to be filled, it simply is. But there is a second hypothesis, a darker interpretation of the silence. The filter lies ahead of us. Every civilization that reaches our level of technological sophistication encounters the same insurmountable wall. Perhaps it is self-annihilation, nuclear fire, engineered pathogens, artificial intelligence that recursively improves beyond containment. Perhaps it is environmental collapse encoded into the thermodynamics of industrial growth. Or perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps interstellar travel is a fantasy. The energy requirements are not just daunting, they may be physically prohibitive for any biological species operating within the known laws of thermodynamics. We built rockets, we reached the moon, we designed the Artemis program with the hubris of a species that believes momentum is destiny. But momentum ends. And the 4 humans now approaching lunar orbit are not pioneers carving a path to the stars. They are test subjects, variables in an experiment determining whether our species can overcome the next barrier, or whether we join the silence. There is a region of space called the Botez void. It spans 330 million light years. A supervoid so vast that light from one edge takes longer to cross than the entire span of time since the first dinosaurs walked Earth. Within this volume of space, astronomers count 60 galaxies. Statistical models predict there should be thousands. The emptiness is not natural. It violates the large-scale homogeneity of cosmic structure. Matter should not avoid a region this large. Galaxies should not choose to stay away. And yet, is this what a filtered region looks like? A volume of space where civilizations arose, reached for the stars, triggered something we cannot yet comprehend, and were erased? Is the void a scar, a quarantine zone, or is it simply another reminder that the universe operates on scales where our pattern-seeking minds see intention in randomness, design in entropy? We don't know. We drift through a cosmos that may be a graveyard or a waiting room. And aboard Orion, 4 fragile primates, enclosed in aluminum and hubris, are about to test whether the next threshold is crossable. The stated goal is a permanent human presence on the moon. Not a visit, a presence. The word itself betrays the strategy. We are attempting to replicate the terrestrial anomaly, the thin film of breathable air, liquid water, and tolerable pressure that covers less than 1% of Earth's surface, and transplant it 1.3 light seconds away. We frame this as conquest, as expansion, It is neither. It is a coping mechanism dressed in the language of manifest destiny. We are not reaching outward. We are clinging to the last handhold before the fall, calling it progress so we can sleep at night. The moon is not a new world. It is the closest piece of inhospitable rock we can stand on without immediately dying. And even that requires a machine to breathe for us. Today in the permanently shadowed depths of Shackleton Crater, we search for water ice. Not because we are explorers, because we are desperate. The rocket equation does not negotiate. It is carved into the structure of reality itself. To carry more fuel, you need more fuel to carry that fuel, in an infinite recursion of diminishing returns. Every kilogram of cargo multiplies the mass of propellant required to move it. Water ice on the moon represents a local loophole, a cosmic technicality. If we can harvest hydrogen and oxygen from frozen regolith instead of hauling it from Earth's gravity well, we can reduce the payload mass just enough to make the mathematics slightly less punishing. Slightly. This is not discovery. This is not science as wonder. This is a species examining the bars of its cage, measuring them, calculating whether the gaps are wide enough to slip through. They are not. Mainstream scientific institutions describe our confinement to the solar system as a series of engineering challenges: propulsion, shielding, life support, radiation mitigation. Each problem is framed as a puzzle waiting to be solved with enough funding, ingenuity, time. The assumption is embedded in the phrasing: these are temporary obstacles, not fundamental limits. But consider the alternative. What if they are not puzzles at all? What if the speed of light, the energy density of chemical bonds, the fragility of carbon-based molecular machinery, what if these are not bugs in the system, but the system itself? A fish does not frame its inability to breathe air as an engineering challenge. It is a fundamental constraint of its architecture. Yet we insist, against all thermodynamic evidence, that our inability to cross interstellar voids is merely a problem of insufficient cleverness. The reframing is not scientific. It is psychological armor. The James Webb Space Telescope orbits 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, staring backward into the abyss. It collects photons, messengers from galaxies that existed when the universe was young. The light itself is older than multicellular life on Earth. By the time it reaches the gold-plated mirrors, the objects that emitted it may no longer exist. This is the other form of coping. If we cannot move through space, we will move through time, by proxy. We will watch the birth of stars that died before our sun ignited. We will catalog the spectra of exoplanet atmospheres we will never breathe. We will construct maps of a cosmos we will never touch. It is astronomy as spectator sport, cosmology as voyeurism. We peer through the glass at a party we were not invited to and call it participation. Astronauts who have seen the Earth from orbit often describe the overview effect, a profound shift in perspective, a sense of unity, fragility, interconnectedness. The experience is framed as transcendent, enlightening, but peel back the language. What they are describing is the sudden, unfiltered realization of their own insignificance, the recognition that the entire history of human civilization, every war, every empire, every idea, occurred on a fragile blue marble, suspended in a void that does not care whether we exist. The reframing of existential terror into spiritual awakening is not accidental. It is a necessary self-deception, a mental filter required to continue functioning after the illusion of cosmic importance has been shattered. We cannot return from that revelation unchanged. So we tell ourselves it was beautiful. We call it perspective. We do not call it what it is. The moment the mind protects itself from the truth by rewriting the narrative before despair can take root. There is a proposal to investigate transient lunar phenomena, brief, unexplained flashes of light observed on the moon's surface for centuries. Modern instruments will be deployed, data will be gathered, hypotheses will be tested. No one seriously believes we will find anything. The flashes are likely impact events, outgassing, instrument artifacts. The phenomena are transient because they are mundane, but we will investigate anyway, because it gives us something to do, a reason to point our instruments at the empty house and listen, just in case there is something more than silence. It is a scientific seance. We know the moon is dead. We know the void does not whisper back, but we listen, because listening is easier than accepting that there is nothing to hear.